Welcome again. So, if you remember, we left at talking about the definition of generational conflict. I am starting the slide from there itself. And as I said that we have evolved the mind and thought because of this conflict. So, what we term as generational conflict is just point of views, but it still causes tremendous misery emotionally. Now, if you look at it, because of certain change in technology and information boom, what used to be an intergenerational thing, like between grandfather and son and the grandson, has become almost like within the generation. Between the father and son, gaps which cause generation gaps and the conflict within one generation, that means elder brother and the younger brother, between them say in a gap of say 10 years, the technology and information changes in such a way that there is a conflict then. The number of slightly elder brothers who get worried about younger brothers is becoming more and more. So, why does it happen? What we know now that adolescent is marked by these three things. Menarche is the onset of menstrual cycle, gonadarchy is changing of secondary sexual characters, and there is a huge surge of adrenaline which makes us aggressive. So, this is a great decade which starts from say from around 11, 12 to around 20 or something. Hormones are raging, there is a certain amount of framelessness. Now, this framelessness, if you ask me, normally see human brain receives so many inputs within a given day and just multiplied with the number of years, number of seconds when you are awake or even when you are sleeping, the whole thing is humongous. For the brain to handle this, brain just has one trick. It has to take all data, remove the uncertainty and the ambiguity of it and make certain things central to your living, make it certain. So, mind is always aspiring to look for certain frames, frame not in the sense of very rigid frames, that, but if you have a broad certainty, broad idea, broad direction, almost making it a linear. So, it is a whole process of a non-linear existence going into a linear existence. So, this framelessness is compounded by a sudden change in your body when your hormones are actually changing. All these hormones are being regulated by the brain chemistry, which, and it is not a linear thing again. It may appear linear, but the whole feedback system. So, you have neurotransmitters in the brain which secrete hormone. This hormone actually affect behavior. This behavior goes back here and there is a whole feedback system, multiple feedback system. So, in the already existing plethora of information, this type of processes they compound the whole thing. So, as I said, as society struggles to handle and understand what exactly is happening to these kids, there are certain facts, and the facts are that we are talking about development, that the neurodevelopment trajectory determines an individual's ability to integrate cognitive, emotional and social processes. This is saying in other word that as you are growing, as your brain is taking information, what trajectory your mind takes in integrating this huge data, processing it, trying to form a frame of your life to create certainties in a world which is still uncertain for you. There is a great dread in which way you are going. The societal pressures of achievement of, and these are external things, of handling parental pressure, of handling education, of planning for career, making a secure future and making the basic needs of food, security, and at the same time you are trying to handle, you are becoming sexually aware of yourself, you are becoming conscious of yourself. At the same time you have to handle the allurements of opposite sex, because hormones have started raging and they are pushing you towards attraction towards opposite sex, be it male or female, so much. If you try to draw on some axis, this thing is a huge complex network, and amidst this you have to remain yourself, you have to make yourself, and everybody who meets you asks what are you going to do future and so on and so forth. All this have to be integrated within the brain. So, brain is doing a pretty good job of keeping most people all right, because if we look at this process from outside, you will still wonder how is it happening. So, the larger process is on a genetic temperament, as I said, is epigenetic. So, just revising what I was saying, the phases of brain growth is the first trimester and the first 2 years of life, largely with the brain there is a splurge of growth of neurons. Changes do occur in the second decade, which is starting from adolescent, but adolescent is a time of profound brain growth, but the change is not so much in the number of neurons, the change is in the architecture and processes. If you remember from the neurophysiology, and we said it is a huge network, if you look at it and the way it is connected on multiple axes, from if you just look at this, any brain diagram will tell you huge multiple axes, and they are not going through some centralized process, there is no centralized process, their neurons are activated, they connect, and this is just a very simplified thing, and all these points have to be connected. Now, anything can be connected. So, this type of connections are form the architecture, and this architecture is affected by processes. If you remember what I said, if you look at geography, which is anatomy, has a reciprocal connection with history. This is function, this is architecture. So, both affect each other in the way that the processes are reactions, the stimulus from the environment, everything going on, and this alters the architecture. The process alters architecture, which in turn gives rise to new behavior, which again alters the process. So, this is a huge feed loop which is going on, and that determines the trajectory of growth. So, I hope you understand this. So, I will say it once more. The brain has neurons which are firing, they are creating certain behavior, you do a certain behavior, act on the environment, there is a consequence of it. The consequence fires back on your brain in a good or bad way. If it is good, you keep repeating, if it is bad, you do not repeat it, that is a learning, but this learning comes from change in the connections between neurons in the brain, called synaptic plasticity. I will write it here, it is called synaptic plasticity, the capability of the brain synapses to change through feedback, learning, memorizing from the environment. So, between the childhood and adulthood, the brain's wiring diagram grows in complexity. So, what was a simple thing when you were born, and the first 2 years when the stimulus were less, when your body was not active, you in the first year of life normally you do not poke the environment. You may want your food by crying or doing all that things, but you still are not very active. But as you grow active in the 2 years and 3 years, you go and start poking the environment. Environment keeps poking you back, and thus the neurons which were lying in simple connections, they grow in complexity. So, what may be just in a very simple way, what may be a 2 neurons connecting to 2 when there is no activity may become 2000 later on with the increasing complexity. So, it is an interface of what is happening and the reflection of it in the brain in the form of a connection. Ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. Anybody who studied evolution and human anatomy and embryology knows it. The thinking brain was the last to develop. It was like motor brain, which even reptiles have, to emotional brain. Lot of primates have the emotionality like us. There are no new, and there is a neo brain, neo cerebrum, which we call, which is thinking brain. Frontal lobes have been assigned, what we have understood in the last 100 years from psychology, from imaging, from electrophysiology, that frontal lobes are one of the last areas of the brain to fully mature, especially this area called dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. The dorsolateral ontogeny is individual development, phylogeny is the development of the species. So, a individual's development is almost like development of the species. This is the phylogeny from reptiles, primates, man. So, if you look at the development like this, the same thing happens in the brain with individual development. The individual development is motor development. When you are a kid, you are moving your hands. Emotional develops as you are born, and thinking develops much later. But the rationalized thinking, which dorsolateral prefrontal cortex does, is responsible for skills like prioritizing, organizing, planning, making strategies, controlling impulses, and allocating attention, which is a function of will or intent. This is the last to develop, and if you ask me, we ask small kids to think and not being able to make decisions at 13, 14, which is slightly unfair to them, because this area of the brain develops somewhere around 18 and 19. So, the maturing brain grows circuits, synaptic connections for multitasking and parallel processing. When you are a kid, you do simple things, you start doing one act and keep playing it, nobody bothers you. So, the process still remains similar, but as you grow, the complexity of the acts increase, and when you are an adult, you are expected to do a lot of multitasking. You have to do your office work, you have to still worry about your family, you have to keep worrying about your income, your safety, security and what not, and take all the, you are supposed to know about the world and the politics and some sports, and I mean we all know it, it's our life. So, brain cannot take one by one and keep doing a linear processing, otherwise we will never move. So, brain is also developing to do multitasking. This it does again by synaptic connection. So, as I said, in the early stages the brain grows like there is a overgrowth, then there is a pruning happening around 15, 16 years of age, and that is the time when most of the illnesses also start. The pruning goes on this rate. So, the brain has already grown into billions, 10 to the power 10 to 10 to the power minus 11 neurons with 10 to the power 14 synapses. The pruning happens at almost 30,000 neurons per second. So, where there is a illness being triggered, in certain areas the pruning happens faster. So, dopamine inputs to the dopamine, if you remember, is one of the neurotransmitters, is very critical for focusing attention during conflicting options. They grow dramatically during adolescence. So, you understand what I am saying. Your brain was taking in inputs, was developing in complexity, trying to do multitasking, but when you start becoming a thinking individual, now this you can compare it with the psychological models of Freud and Piaget and Erikson. If you look at the list, which I will probably have in the slides, look around this age of around 16, 17 to 18, 19. This will almost correspond to the thinking task which the brain is developing psychologically. So, what you observe in the external world as being a psychological thing, and so you observe behavior, you have a psychological theory for it, now compare it with biology, it all fits well. So, dopamine inputs are very important for focusing attention during conflicting options means that you developed a will or intent or ability to choose. This is the thing which you call as developing judgment, criticality, really growing up. Impulse control, when you are a child you do a lot of things impulsively, nobody bothers, nobody expects you to take decision on that. But as an adult if you start doing the same thing like snatching somebody's ball, there will be severe repercussion. That a kid snatches, it is all expected. Planning, half the problem in generational conflict is that all parents feel that kids are not planning, although they may be planning in a different way. Decision making, no adult believes that a adolescent or a child can decide, but they are largely prefrontal cortex phenomena. They are still maturing during adolescence and it will go up to whatever time till it all develops. But essentially the growing means that in simplest word they think, the adults think that now you can think, judge, decide for your own benefit and for society's benefit, but that age is not before 18 or 19. Again as I said, controlling impulses, inhibiting inappropriate behavior, what you are expected to do in adolescence is different from childhood. Those same things are not forgiven or excused. Appropriate behavior, stopping an activity upon completion, you can't keep doing, and that is one of the, so there is a lot of disturbance with dorsolateral prefrontal cortex found in illnesses like schizophrenia and OCD and impulse discontrol. Shifting, adjusting behavior when situations change. Organizing things, forming strategies, making decisions, empathy. When you are a kid, you really live in your own narcissistic world till a certain age. If you can look at it in the psychological theories also, that the world, you are at the center of the world and the whole world is revolving around you. You do not have to sacrifice for anybody. But as you grow, one sign of the growth is you start shifting your position, you start adjusting, you start giving place to the others. That is also a part of the growth of the brain. So, brain starts developing certain amount of empathy, in the sense that you understand that other person is also a person and his requirements, his sensitivity, reward and punishment. Lot of kids, and when we were also kids, we used to never bother about punishment. You have punishment, you will again go and repeat the same thing, or if you feel happy about something, you will keep doing it. All that is expected in the childhood because your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, not that they knew it, now we know it, but as you grow up, you are also expected to be sensitive to the feedbacks, that if you have been reprimanded, and that is how law works. One thing of the law and crime and all that is that people fail to understand the repercussions of their act. So, the law punishes them and they are supposed to learn from the punishment. Some of them do not learn, so they are the breed of hardened criminals or antisocial people. And working memory, that what has been told to you, what you are doing, you can bring out things to your memory and really keep working on them. Other changes which are happening in the brain is myelination. The axons, if you remember from the anatomy, which really transmit information, they are, the immaturity of the brain is because there is a lack of myelination. So, in some areas as myelination approaches, the axons mature, the signal patterns do not diffuse, they do not keep running away here and there, and more or less they are in certain form of a pattern. Now, this certainty of firing, so imagine there is no certainty of firing if when the brain is not mature, myelination is not complete, there is too much of information, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is not developed. As it grows, there is a myelination. So, the pattern firing, the speed of the firing is more or less settled, that is a sign towards certainty. There is a language circuitry which develops. If you go back and look at Piaget, the phases of abstract handling and cognitive development, language is one of the big tool for expression. and kids master, although they learn lot of words, vocabulary develops fastest in the time when the brain is overgrowing. Probably, as there is a debate, people say that language is a tool for expression, whereas people like Chomsky say that language is primary, innate. It is the development of language in human beings which has created the complexity. So, the development of the language which creates the circuitry of the brain, rather than that the circuitry develops and that takes the language, it is not that. So, that debate is, you can choose whatever way, but the fact is that language circuitry is a big fillip to the corpus callosum, rostrocaudal, from front to back. Corpus callosum is the thick bush of fibers between the two. So, that means the left and right brain which were running in two separate directions has also coming together in a single form of amygdala, the area which controls fear and emotions, hippocampus, the area of memory, all these are maturing at that time. So, younger kids, as I said, are more egotistical, narcissistic and live in a self-centered. Obviously, the brain has taken information, but is still not formed the sense of empathy is not developed, prefrontal cortex which controls is not developed, amygdala is not fully mature, myelination is not, the brain is like, okay, whichever direction it starts firing it. This is a skill which, so this is from Erik Erikson. So, we look at it, as I said, you forget the middle, the early childhood. So, these are the qualities which Erikson said that if you have to overcome, come out successfully out of this conflicting thing, 7 to 12 years, industry versus inferiority, main question, am I good at what I do? Adolescent, role confusion, who am I and what is my goal in life? And then intimacy versus, these are all adult things. So, this is the area, so look at 7 to 18, this is the time when dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, and these questions of who am I and what my goals are all related to judgment, if you look at it. This is Piaget's theory, again from birth to 2 age year they experience the world through movement and sense, acquisition of motor skills. 7 to 11 they start to think logically, and after age 11 development of, so this is again that area which responds to development of prefrontal cortex and other. Here it is all about whatever direction the brain fires. We talk a lot about telling the kid that one should be right and truthful, but look at it, the moral development also evolves with the brain development. So, and if you tell things to a kid which where his brain is not developed, he will not understand. So, I think in the society which is too intrusive, we keep telling too many things to the kids, and then kids react and their brain goes into anxiety, then we say they are not well, this and that. So, level 1 is younger age where they talk about what is in it for me. As I said, if you compare it with Piaget's theory, or they are egoistical. So, they will just look at the simple thing, whether it will get them punishment or it will get them something. Conventional is the time when it is roughly around 7 to 11, and this is again 12 to 18. This is the time when real morality develops. In adolescent, the good boy, good girl, you want to impress others and be like the authority, then you start feeling power, and this is the time when you start developing concerns for society, again coming back with empathy. So, adult responses to stimuli are more intellectual, while teenagers often from the gut, and that is why we call them very impulsive, and teenagers are just they are, we all have been like that. The changeability, the plasticity of the brain is well suited to meet the demands of teen life. Guidance from adults is just essential when this decision making circuitry, if you force and the brain is in some different mode, there will be conflict and anxiety and behavioral issues. So, adults, for the best thing for adults is to guide. The ability for the brain to plan, adapt to the environment and to imagine possible future consequences. Read it again, the ability for the brain to plan, adapt to the social environment and to imagine possible future consequences, or to appropriately gauge their emotional significance, is still developing throughout. So, it is still not developed. So, once you are in conflict with adolescents, think over about all this. The brain functions that enhance their ability to connect gut feeling with their ability to help retentive memory to put situations into context and to remember past details about a situation are also under major construction, So, you do not go and demolish half built building. What you do is to give shape to the building, so that the final building comes up in a better. So, what are the implications? The implications are, there are neurobiological factors which from 0 to 18 and slightly beyond that are working to mature the brain. Parents, adults, institutions like religion, like society, like and things like caste, and add to it fear of future, identity, all this are compounding factors. So, they are actually learning if you look at it. So, self, they themselves may be able to shape their own. Even if you do not do anything, all teenage mind will create their own reality and really make something, everybody does something. The big question is whether the brain's developing wiring diagram is automatic or susceptible to manipulation and intervention. Positively called training, negatively controlling. So, they can be misdirected, used for wrong purposes by wily politicians, by the forces which want to exploit, or they can be directed towards even fighting for freedom of the country or creating great art and science. And even if these external influences are not given in a planned way, it will develop automatically, because so this is the onset of psychiatric disorders because of the pruning, because of the negative influences. The result is, this is the result of this, as we already talked. Now, these are some terms which everybody uses, they are disobedient, they are isolated, emotional, abusive. I have gathered this from the lot of workshops, talking to teachers and all. So, the pain of the adolescent and kids is, when I sit in a psychiatric clinic and listen to them, is that they are either feel or being made to feel different or inferior. They either feel stupid or different and not knowing much as of others. There is lack of communication or verbal violence, lack of time from elders, and the commonest complaint is that no one understands. They may not verbalize it, but it is a very, very common feeling. So, what are the sources of conflict? Positioning, what is your position as an adolescent or a kid or as a adult? Biological, so one simple thing like sleep, all parents complain that a kid who is in 10-15 years or in class 10 sleeps more, without ever realizing that biologically the need for sleep increases. Maybe brain does it to get more time to organize its synapses and organize all the informational input which has gone into the head. Brain has to need time, that is one purpose of the sleep. Information processing is one of the purposes of the sleep, because brain has to reject a lot of stuff, save some of them, save it in the synaptic changes and modulation. The need for sex obviously is raging, the attraction towards opposite sex, nobody can deny this, because that is one of the purpose of genes, to reproduce, to keep reproducing species. So, that chemistry will be thrown open any time. Social pressures, as I said, career, ambition, relationships, psychological of who am I, what am I going to do, looking at the whole world. No kid will bother of doing anything unless the kid starts looking at the world and starts wondering what am I going to do. Perspectives, there are so many of them, from religion, education, context, country, history, and that the processes which are available are again cognition and emotion. Can we do something? Communication, guidance, freedom to decide, responsibility to bear the consequences, act like a facilitator and a potter. You have seen that potter, in Hindi we call it Kumar, who does not actually press his hands to make a shape out of that wet mud, clay. He just puts his hand on that rotating wheel in the center, and if you ask any experienced potter, he says the design automatically will come out. It is already there in the clay. It will take its shape. It will take its shape. The hand just facilitates. Do not own the teenager. Now, why I was talking about development and adolescent, because separating the two would not have been right. So, from 0 to 18, 19 years, when all these things are going on, when the environment is also putting its data into your head, you have your temperament to deal with it and you do not know which way you are going, a lot of confusion, future, this, that and what not. How do we decide? Get back to that basic question. How do we decide whether it is a problem, it is a illness or a issue? The simplest would be any one off incident which most of us have done is not a problem, unless it is very, very disruptive. If somebody puts a fire to the house or breaks a television, that is disruptive. Most of us would not have broken a TV, but most of us would have sometime seen the television over time. So, seeing a television over time for 5 days does not mean anything, but it becomes a problem if the behavior is persistent, if it is repetitive, it is causing disruption in the normal growth. Like a kid is expected to go to school, study, play, be happy, enjoy life, sometimes get upset, that is all right, sometimes not study, sometimes. So, all this sometimes are not a problem, but if it is a persistent, the kid is continuously failing in one subject, or kid is continuously fighting with other kids, or kid is not attending school, not going, or before age indulging in acts like cruelty, like smoking, like drinking, or so these are issues which are problems. So, anybody can decide for one issue. In a general advice, this was all very general advice, one should not get after kids life, observe him for some time, and that is why we prefer that when kids are brought to us, we do not decide about the label in one, as I said, because labeling goes far in life. What we do normally is observe a kid over time, gather the maximum sources of report from parents, teacher, and then make an opinion of it, whether it is a diagnosis, a illness. Sometimes we do not even bother about diagnosis, we look symptomatically. So, what we have to treat is the child and the child's behavior, not a syndrome, not a diagnostic label, unless it is really there. So, I will just end at the intro of this, and in next few lectures, 2-3 lectures whatever we have in this week, we will talk about certain psychiatric illnesses like autism and the group of externalizing and internalizing disorder and learning disability. And if we have time at the end of this 10 hours, I would invite cases from you, which we can discuss in the last session for half an hour or 25 minutes. If you keep on your forum, if you write back to me your cases, I will pick some of them and discuss it over the last session, but that is only once you send it. Thank you.